Recording. So yes, just everybody understand that this is being recorded and it will be available on the website tomorrow. And so let's get to the next slide. So this is a 6-session series. We're on the 3rd, talking about data policy and strategy. And we have 3 more after this: metadata, master and reference data, and data quality. So a little housekeeping: if you have questions, please raise the questions via the chat window, and Rich and Katie will call it out when we get to the question and answer sections. And when we do our regular feature, Tales from the Front, if you have something to share, please also mention that through chat. So I bring this slide up with every session because we need to know what we're doing and what is data governance. It's the orchestration of people, processes, and technology, and I always put large P's and a small t, to manage critical data assets. And since we have people and processes, we're using roles, responsibilities, policies, procedures. And, you know, aligns with overall company objectives. What we want is for people to trust the data. And that's why we govern the data, so that people do have a sense of trust. So we're talking about data policy and strategy in this meeting. And strategy kind of goes over the line from data governance to data management. But I think it's worth talking about just a little bit. So we're going to talk about what is a strategy and what is the role of the strategy and policy work stream. Make sure that with strategies and policies, you have frequent reviews, because you make a policy today, the business is in a certain state, the technology is in a certain state, and I guarantee you tomorrow that state will not exist anymore. So a couple of quotes about what a strategy is. And I kind of like the second one. It's a framework for making decisions. You use a strategy when you're wondering, should I do A or should I do B? Well, what does the strategy say? It's a guideline. And then you use the policy committee, the policy work stream folks, when it's unclear and when you feel that you need a mandate behind you. Why do you need a strategy? Well, you have to align the activities of data management to those of the analytics and research folks, right? So as you are using this data, these are going to be your consumers. And you want to make sure that you line up to also the desired outcomes of the businesses. Back to decisions, provide guidelines for people, processes, and tools. And to help justify your decisions instead of having them come out of thin air, right? Because you should be able to relate the decision back to how it supports the strategy, and also to help secure funding. If your decision, if your proposal moves the strategy forward, you're more likely to get it funded. The next thing that you need to know about strategy: I'm not the expert. There are hundreds of books out on the market about strategy. And if you're going to be really serious about creating a data strategy, I would suggest starting with the books and maybe getting some consultation help to build your policy. So I'm not the expert, but I want to talk about some of the considerations on how what your decisions ought to be, some guidance for those decisions. And the first consideration is people. Who are the people who are subscribing to your data? Are they highly skilled in querying? Are they SQL people, or are they, the bulk of them, people who want the information, want to get the insights out of the data. And so, along the continuum, there's NoSQL technology, Hadoop and Neo4j and HBase and MongoDB and, all those not NoSQL, not only SQL technologies. For SQL people, they generally can live pretty well in a normalized data warehouse. Those with a little lower on the skills matrix might prefer a denormalized reporting data mart. And this is a common technique, to have your warehouse and then spin off data marts from the warehouse that are conform to a set of use cases and a certain set of people. And for your data browsers, really what you're looking for is a specific data set, right? And a tool to put on top of it. This is the fastest way for somebody who doesn't have the querying skills, the data skills to get to insight. The next consideration is what level of refinement do you really need? So your data scientists like the raw data, because the raw data, warts and all, not only goes into creating the results, but also to creating the margin of error. So, they like that raw data. They also like the join data. When data from multiple sources are joined together and clearly indicated, and the metadata, that's next month's presentation, the metadata, documented. The central analytics team want standardized data, where data from multiple sources all kind of look alike as much as possible. So that's an extra level of refinement or curation. And then your highly refined, denormalized data is more for the self-service people. Next consideration, where are you going to put this thing? Going back to my friends at Gartner, this is their data management infrastructure model, and it's based upon how well do you know the questions surrounding the data, and how well do you know the data itself? So when we start from the known, the foundational core, this is the data that's coming out of your core systems, your PeopleSoft or your ERP system, your HR, your financial, and then whichever system runs your business, whatever that business is. So that's foundational core data. But even that foundational core data where you know the questions, you may also start saying, well, what else can this data tell me? What if we start doing some pattern recognition on it? What if we take some hypotheses and test it against the data? And that is the upper left, the northwest quadrant there, expanding, understanding, and investigating. Now, when you don't know much about the data, so this is a new data source, and generally this is going to be an external data source, something that's coming into your organization that has some value add. The first step is the northeast corner where you're exploring it, discovering it. And then in the second phase of that, you're down in the southeast, establishing value. And to this model, what Gartner proposes is something like this. So for unknown data, that's where data lake technologies, NoSQL technologies really excel, because you can bring in that data, not having it perfect, not knowing everything about it, and study it and get it down from the northeast down to the southeast where you're establishing value. Traditional data warehouse is where you would house your foundational core. Your systems probably already have it. If you're an Epic shop, you have Caboodle. If you're a PeopleSoft shop, you have Oracle Business Intelligence applications. And when you're then trying to expand and understand this other data, you get to the next phase, and it could be either depending on the use case. Usually the foundational core, doesn't have all of that external data in it. That's what your lake is all about. But you can take that data and bring it into your traditional data warehouse once you understand it. So I'm going to pause for questions here at 12 minutes after. Rich, do we have any questions?
Yeah, I guess it's a simple one, and it's actually from me on one of your slides. You're doing people, processes, and tools.
Mm-hmm.
Tools was in a smaller format. Was there a reason for that, or were you just
Absolutely?
Yeah.
Because the whole thing about governance and about data management is it's the processes and who is doing what.
Mm-hmm.
The tools exist to support that. And I'm not minimizing the importance of the tool by putting it in a smaller font. But what I'm trying to say is that the tool needs to support the people in the process. So generally, it should come kind of later. The bigger concentration should be on the process. And, I don't want to minimize the tool because, things like, the web technologies opened up a whole new avenue. Amazon would not be what Amazon is today if it wasn't for that technology, right? They would have just been another bookstore that Barnes and Nobles would have killed and would have closed. So I'm not minimizing the tools and the technology, but I'm just saying that the people in the process have to come first. This is why a strategy, because you have to understand the goals of the business and then get the correct tools implemented in a way that will support the people in the process.
Okay, and one more question. When you say people want really detailed information for the, what would be some examples of that detail? Would it be attributes of the data? Would it, would it be a definition of what the data is? What type of things would they be looking for?
So where were we talking here?
I think it was, you were going back on the slides and you say the people that really want, Harry, I think it's highly refined. Go back to the highly refined, right there, where the butane is, I guess.
Right. So rephrase the question, please.
You were saying, it wasn't on this slide that you said it, but you said some people really want to know what the detail of the data is.
Okay. I was talking about the metadata.
Okay. Oh, okay.
A little preview, and that was a couple slides before that.
Gotcha.
In order for somebody to properly use the data, that person has to know what it means and how to use it correctly, right? And I have an example that I like to give where, and I guess I could say this, in Epic, there's a field called admission date and time.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is when you walk into the ED and you get registered, that is admission date and time. That's when the clock starts on the ED visit. And if you walk out of the ED a little bit later, the clock stops there. But if you're admitted, if you have that admission date and time when you walk into the ED, and then later you are admitted as an inpatient, the inpatient stay does not start at that point. Per the rules from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, the inpatient stay starts when you write the order. And if you're going to use admission date and time, you have to know that. And now that we're on the refinement slide, the metadata, the business glossary, and we're going to talk about that next month, but it would give all those details. And that would probably be in your standardized data. What you might want to do for the highly refined data is take that right out and just have some admission date and time field. If it's an ED visit, what goes in there, the epic admission date time. But if it's an inpatient visit, it's the start, it's the date and time of the order to admit. And that way you can kind of wash out that requiring knowing that, and just assure people, yep, the admission date and time, no matter what kind of an encounter it is, it's fine.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to the other side of that slide on the crude oil. The raw data, are you talking down to the level of its integer, its character, its format looks like this? For some old COBOL shops, could it be packed character? I mean, is that what you're talking about? Or
well, when I'm talking about raw data, I mean, hopefully when you brought the data in, wherever you got it from has given you kind of a layout of what it is. But when I'm talking about raw data is, I'm talking about, data that hasn't been cleaned up yet. There may be a lot of quality issues with it. And, as you continue to refine, you may just leave those behind and only keep those that have the quality issues. So, the raw data is the state that it's in when it comes into your organization.
Okay, thanks. That's all we have right now.
All right. Then let's go on and we'll talk about the data governance functional organization. And thank you, Mark Cesaro. This was your slide from last month, and I decided, it looks good, and we should be using a consistent slide. So underneath the Data Governance Steering Committee, which we talked about, sits the data policy work stream. The leaders of the data policy work stream sit on the steering committee and escalate any issues to the steering committee. They work with the information governors to set policy and make sure that the policy matches what the governors need and matches what the organization needs. So here's the work streams, rights, accountabilities, and commitments. So one of the rights is to determine which data-related policies to propose and when. You can't hit everything at once, so you're going to hit them, upon urgency, or when it becomes something that you really need to see. Decide when to propose a guideline instead of a policy. So the difference between a guideline and a policy is how is it enforced, right? If you break a guideline, somebody's going to ask you, why did you break the guideline? And you'll have an explanation. If you break a policy, someone's going to ask you, do you have another job yet? Right. So, that's the difference between a guideline and a policy. Also, when we talk about the data governance roles, and last month we talked about the information governors, the data stewards, we can formalize those roles with policies and guidelines. So to help the folks in those roles do their job, we give them policy guidelines. Here's what you do. Clarify the definitions of regulated data and standardize the associated security processes. And what that means is, in every industry, there is some data that falls under some kind of a government regulation. Here in healthcare, there is, of course, HIPAA. And, the role, one of the roles of the data policy work stream is to ensure that there's clarity around those regulations, what you can and can't do. And then, regulated data is the most sensitive, but then there's business sensitive data. And the policy work stream will clarify the business sensitive data definitions as well. So business sensitive is something that we really don't want to get out, but unlike HIPAA, if there's a breach, we don't have to report it. The accountabilities, well, one of them is make sure that people have access to the policy. And, there's nothing like a policy that nobody knows about, because it might as well not exist. Remove duplication and conflicts. So there might be existing policies where some provision is mutually exclusive from another provision. And when those are discovered, this comes, this is part of the data work streams accountabilities, to make sure that there are no, well, as few of those as possible. Facilitate the data policy process and create the process for getting a policy proposed, getting a policy put into place, and ensuring that the policy doesn't put somebody out of business, with its limitations, while ensuring that our regulated and our business sensitive data are kept secure. So also the work stream will staff the data policy initiatives when a policy is being created. Who's going to be on the committee to create that policy? Approve the drafts prior to steering committee review, and any unresolved challenges will go to the steering committee. And then finally, it's last, but maybe it should be first. Communicate and evangelize the program. That goes along with providing access to the data policy. People have to know that this is going on. People have to know that there's a forum. If a policy is restricting a business function, or if somebody feels that a policy is a little too loose and is putting the organization at risk. So that's how evangelization helps. And the commitments are, they're not that large. The folks who are writing up the policies are going to be taking more time than this, but the work stream committee members themselves, as part of it, it's really not a lot of time. So when we talk about policies, well, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but policies in terms of release of data to vendors or for subpoenas, policies about partnerships and data exchanges, and both from a vendor client relationship, or especially in healthcare, partnering with other organizations for research. The more data you have for research, the better. So if you can get an agreement with another healthcare system and do some joint research, well, that will help. Regarding internal consumers or subscribers to the data, who's allowed to see what, and when the consumer is allowed, what are the boundaries of what that consumer can see? The committee is also charged with compliance with regulations. And remember that regulations go both ways. In terms of Freedom of Information Act, in terms of HIPAA policies that require immediate, getting data immediately to patients, as well as things like the minimal data required provision of HIPAA. So regulations go both ways. They go, you have to release this data, or you're not allowed to release this data. And throughout all of this, there needs to be consideration of risks to the organization. one of the bullet items I didn't put, and maybe I should have put, is data retention. Now, Peter Aiken, he's a professor of data governance, and he's published a lot of books. He does many webinars on it. And he says that, data is an asset that never loses value. And I took him on in a webinar, and I said, that's not true, because data will, as time goes on, data may lose its usefulness, but if it's discoverable, then you can't be sued for what you don't have. And as long as you're following correct guidelines and policies, you want to consider the risk of having data out there for too long. So maybe what you do is you de-identify it and keep it around for long-term analytics and for research. But the policy work stream needs to be thinking about the risks that are associated with even having this data, and then the risks associated with either holding it back or releasing it. So when we're talking about the policy work stream, who do we include? Your compliance department, your legal department, your security department, and don't forget to have some representation from the consumers who, especially internal consumers, who need that data more than anybody else. So some of the lessons that we learned is, you want to keep it small, but you want to make sure that anybody who can veto a policy later on or object to it is represented on the committee, right? You don't want to go through all the effort of writing up a policy and then an executive says, no way, Jose. So, make sure that there's representation. Also, this is not new work. This is work that's going on all the time. And what you're hoping to do with this is to take all the time that you're spending cleaning up from an adverse event and stopping that adverse event from happening to begin with. So, we're just recognizing the work, we're organizing it, and we're standardizing it so that there's a place where people can know where the policies are, know how to file for exemptions, know how to file for changes. And it has to be very flexible. And especially when you're talking about strategy, a strategy is a strategy is basically policy, in terms of guidelines and how you create your data sets. But you're creating a strategy for the business as it is now and for the technology as it is now. And I guarantee you a year from now, the business climate will have changed, as will the technology. So, frequent review of the policies, frequent review of the strategy, I think, is very important. And we come up to, sorry. And we come up to the second question and answer. Rich, do we have anything?
Ron, nope. There's nobody has added anything. I had a question, but you answered it as you continued on your presentation. So thank you. Oh, I got one. Here we go. What titles or skill set do you want on a policy work stream? Who in IT should be on it?
So I think the titles, on a policy work stream, I think the titles need to be high enough to have the clout. Again, you need your lawyers on it, you need your compliance people on it, and you need your security people. From IT, it could be the security folks. You might want to have your CDO or some high-level analytics person on on the committee. Because, that person is probably a very large consumer and would have a lot to say.
If those meetings only occur once a month, that can hold things up. Is there I won't call it a bypass, but is there a way to expedite? Is there an expedite?
So that's part of what the committee needs to put into place. And that is, what's the process for petitioning? And that process can certainly happen off cycle, as long as it's defined well enough. And if it isn't, well, then it gets discussed at the next meeting.
Okay. Well, that's all we got for now.
All right. Well, this one's going quickly.
Mhm.
So we're at the point in our presentation, Tales from the Front. Share your data governance journey. Anything I said that you disagree with, anything that you want to share, your own experiences, if you could just raise them up in the chat.
Ron, I think we have a situation here where the people may just be able to unmute. And we'll see how that goes. What do you think? You have to unmute.
Yeah, 31 participants. I think we can unmute.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Anybody who just wants to say anything, please unmute. Go ahead.
So we don't have too many journeys here.
I guess not. I would have figured this would have generated a lot of conversation, because I'm sure everybody has had run-ins with policies.
Yeah, Ron, I just had a comment from our perspective at Hartford Healthcare, Mark Cesaro. The policy work stream and the domain work stream, which is what we talked about last week, have been the two most active, most influential, and work streams out of the five that you've identified. It was interesting. The domain I would have expected, because they need to really kick off the start the game, kick the ball off, if you will, as we mentioned last time. But policy has been extremely active. Every meeting has been jam-packed with items. There have been 2 items that came across that we thought that policy was a place for the question or the inquiry to go. We brought it there. We call them challenges to the team or to the work stream, and 2 of them, they said, no, this is not data governance. They really did a good job with that. It seemed like I was surprised policy got a lot of that kind of inquiry. But there's, I think, 4 requests for data that spin-offs. There's actually 3 groups that are subgroups of that work stream that are up and running constantly and developing policy. I was quite surprised to see that happen.
Yeah, it seemed like there was quite a bit of, let's call it pent-up demand. There's a lot of people that need a lot of data for a lot of things, and I think that there was a demand in the organization, and it just found an outlet.
I think the other thing that we found is the chief compliance officer is on that work stream, and he selected it. We didn't appoint steering committee members to the work streams, but he gravitated to that. And one of the things that's certainly worth noting writing policy is a specific skill set. That's an art. And what he's done is he's given us resources from his team,
Hmm.
the privacy team, to draft policies that have been requested as a result of the data governance activity. That's just something to think about as people are kicking that off as well, that it's nice to have that level of expertise at the ready.
Thank you so much, Mark. Anybody else have any stories to share?
I think we're quiet.
Oh, well,
Okay.
all right.
I'd be interested if anybody has a structure that looks anything like Hartford Healthcare does. I don't know if anybody has that.
Yeah, the structure with the committee and the work streams it's pretty standard.
Standard, okay.
Yeah, well, as standard as such a concept can get.
Mhm.
All right. Well, then let's continue with our wrap up. As usual, I want to acknowledge Mark. Thank you very much for your leadership and your help with these sessions, and Terry Michael, who has been working with us on our data governance program. And Gartner Group is a good place for any kind of research on any kind of IT related topic, as well as the Data Management Association, DAMA. I like to kind of cross-reference what Gartner has with what DAMA has, and they're, things tend to be pretty similar between the organizations. And so we bring ourselves to the halfway point of this series. The third Wednesday of the month, which the next one is on metadata management, April 21st, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, followed by master and reference data, and then we're saving the best for last, data quality management. So next month, we're going to be talking about what metadata is. Sometimes there's confusion. It's one of those terms that can be used in different ways in different circumstances, but when we talk about data governance, here's what we're talking about and why is it so important. We'll be talking about the 3 levels of metadata, each more sophisticated and also more useful than the prior. We'll be talking about data lineage and impact analysis, a very important piece of metadata management. And then how metadata relates to the work of the information governors and the data stewards, application stewards, analytics stewards. And that is the end of the presentation. Anybody have any final comments if you want to unmute? Otherwise, we can all go and enjoy our corned beef and cabbage and green beer.
Or Guinness.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ron.